Lena Brooks proved everyone wrong who said dark-skinned girls don't get chosen. But her real test was just beginning. Because a woman was about to walk back into Julian Hart's life. A woman who could take everything. His love, his family's approval, and the marriage Lena never thought she'd have. If you haven't watched part 1 of this story, go watch it first. Link in the description, or this part won't make sense. Because what happened next would force Lena to face her deepest fear all over again. 3 months had passed since the night I told my mother I was done letting fear make my decisions for me. 3 months of Julian and me building something that felt, for the first time in my life, ordinary in the best way. We had routines now. He showed up at my office on Wednesdays with coffee, no explanation needed, just because he knew Wednesdays were my hardest days. I had a drawer at his house with a change of clothes in it. We spent Sunday mornings arguing over the crossword and losing, every single week, to the same 3 clues. It wasn't the fairy tale my mother once dreamed of for Danielle. It was better because it was real. Julian didn't perform for me. He didn't need to. One Saturday in October, we drove up to Blue Ridge for a weekend away. It was the first real vacation we'd taken together. No galas, no family dinners, no whispers from people who thought they knew our story better than we did. Just mountains, a rented cabin, and a fire that Julian insisted on building himself even though the cabin had perfectly good heating. You don't have to prove anything, I told him, laughing as he knelt in front of the fireplace with kindling scattered around him. I know, he said, not looking up. I just want to. That was Julian. He didn't need an audience. He never had. That night, sitting by the fire, he took my hand and turned it over in his, tracing the lines of my palm like he was reading something written there. Lena, he said quietly, I've spent my whole life being told what I should want, who I should be with, what would look right. He paused. You're the first thing I've ever wanted that had nothing to do with looking right. You just feel right. I didn't say anything. I just waited, my heart climbing somewhere up into my throat. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. I'm not doing this because it's time, or because people expect it, he said. I'm doing it because I can't picture a version of my life anymore where you're not in it. He opened the box. The ring inside wasn't flashy, nothing like what I imagined a heart would give. It was simple, elegant, exactly like him. Marry me, he said. Not a question, a quiet certainty. I said yes before he even finished asking. We drove back to Atlanta 2 days later, and for a while, everything felt weightless. My mother cried when I told her. Real tears, not the careful, performative kind she'd cried at Danielle's engagement. She hugged me and said, I'm sorry it took me this long to just be happy for you. It was enough. It didn't erase everything, but it was enough. Julian's mother was quieter about it, but she sent a bouquet of white orchids to my apartment with a note that read, Welcome to the family, Lena. Margaret. It wasn't warmth exactly, but it wasn't the coldness of that first dinner either. I decided to take it as progress. For 2 weeks, I let myself believe the hardest part was over. Then Vanessa Cole came back. I first heard her name at an engagement party thrown by Julian's business partner, a sprawling rooftop event overlooking the city. I was standing near the bar when I noticed the shift in the room. The way certain conversations quieted, the way heads turned toward the elevator. A woman stepped out. Tall, striking, dressed in a deep red gown that looked like it had been made for exactly this moment. She moved through the crowd like she already owned it. Who was that? I asked Julian's cousin, Marcus, who was standing beside me. Marcus's face did something complicated. That's Vanessa, Julian's ex. I felt my stomach tighten, an old, familiar feeling I thought I'd outgrown. They dated for almost 2 years, Marcus continued, either not noticing my expression or choosing not to. Everyone thought they'd end up married. Then Julian just ended it. Never really said why. Before I could ask anything else, Vanessa was walking toward us, a practiced smile already in place. Julian, she said warmly, ignoring me entirely at first. It's been too long. Julian's posture changed. Not warm, not cold, careful. Vanessa, I didn't know you'd be here. Richard invited me, she said smoothly. We go way back. Her eyes finally slid to me, taking their time. And you must be Lena. I am, I said, extending a hand. She took it briefly, her grip light, her eyes doing a slow, deliberate sweep of me that I recognized instantly. I'd been assessed like that my whole life. Congratulations on the engagement, she said, her voice honeyed. I have to say, I didn't see it coming. Neither did I said evenly. Best surprises usually work that way. Something flickered behind her eyes. Amusement, maybe, or challenge. Well, I'm sure you two will be very happy. She turned back to Julian. We should catch up sometime, for old time's sake. I still have that book you lent me, actually. Keep it, Julian said flatly. She laughed lightly, like he'd made a joke, and drifted back into the crowd, leaving a trail of perfume and unease behind her. You okay? Julian asked once she was gone. I'm fine, I said, but I wasn't entirely sure that was true. Later that week, I made the mistake of looking her up. Vanessa Cole, old Atlanta family, the kind with a wing named after them at some hospital downtown. Photos of her at galas, at ribbon cuttings, at the exact kind of events Julian's mother had once hoped to see him at with someone else entirely. I found an old photo, Julian and Vanessa at some black tie event, both of them young, both of them looking like they belonged to a world I'd only ever watched from outside. I closed the laptop before I could look any longer. Julian found me on the couch that night, quiet in a way he noticed immediately. What's wrong? He asked, sitting beside me. Nothing, I said, then caught myself. Everything, maybe. She's exactly what people expected you to end up with. And I keep wondering why you didn't. Julian was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Vanessa and I dated because it made sense on paper. Same circles, same expectations, same people nodding along like it was inevitable. He shook his head. But it was hollow, Lena. Every conversation felt like a transaction. She loved what came with my name. She was never particularly interested in me. How do you know the difference? I asked quietly. Between someone who loves you and someone who loves what you have. Julian took my hand. Because you're the first person who ever looked uncomfortable around my money instead of drawn to it. You've spent this entire relationship trying to convince yourself you don't deserve this. Vanessa never had to convince herself of anything. She just wanted it. It should have comforted me. Mostly it did. But somewhere underneath, an old fear stirred awake. The same one my mother and cousin had planted years ago. Men like that don't stay with girls like you. I told myself it was just noise. I didn't yet know how loud Vanessa intended to make it. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Julian's assistant, asking if I could stop by his office to sign some paperwork related to the venue for the wedding. I agreed, and made my way downtown that afternoon. The Hart Capitol building was all glass and quiet money, exactly the kind of place I still felt like an outsider in. I was walking toward Julian's office when I heard her voice through a half-open door. She's sweet, I'm sure, Vanessa was saying, her tone dripping with something that wasn't sweetness at all. But you can't tell me you actually see her at the head of the family table at Thanksgiving. Your mother certainly doesn't. I froze in the hallway. Vanessa, that's not your business. Julian's voice, controlled but tight. I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking, Julian. This is a phase, a rebellion, or guilt, or whatever you want to call it. But you and I both know how these things end. She's not built for this world. She'll embarrass herself, and you, eventually. I didn't wait to hear his response. I turned and walked back toward the elevator, my chest tight, old wounds splitting open like they'd never really healed at all. Julian caught up with me in the lobby, his face pale. Lena, wait. How long has she been saying things like that? I asked, my voice shaking despite my effort to keep it steady. That was the first time, he said. I promise you, that was the first time she said anything like that to me directly. But not the last time you've heard it, I said. Not from your family. Not from anyone. Julian didn't answer right away, and that silence told me everything. I need some air, I said, and walked out before he could stop me. That night, alone in my apartment, I sat with the ring on my finger and let myself ask the question I'd been avoiding for weeks. What if they're right? What if I was a phase, a way for Julian to rebel against expectations before eventually settling into the life everyone always assumed he would have? What if Vanessa wasn't lying, just saying out loud what everyone else, including Julian's own mother, was too polite to say to my face? I thought about calling my mother, but I already knew what she'd say, and some small, stubborn part of me didn't want to hear it. Not because it would be wrong, but because it might sound too close to what I was already thinking. Instead, I called my sister. Danielle, I said when she picked up, can I ask you something honestly? Always, she said. Do you think I'm out of my depth? With Julian, with all of it. There was a pause. Not the kind that meant she was avoiding the question, the kind that meant she was actually considering it. I think, she said slowly, you've spent so long being told you don't belong in certain rooms that you look for the exit, even when someone's holding the door open for you. She paused. Lena, I watched you shrink for years. I watched you apologize for existing at family dinners because you thought Mom loved me more for looking a certain way. And now you've found someone who doesn't want you to shrink at all, and you're terrified of what that means. I didn't say anything, because she was right, and there wasn't much to add to that. Don't let some woman who's jealous of what you have talk you out of it, Danielle said. That's not wisdom, Lena. That's fear wearing a nice dress. I didn't answer Julian's calls that night or the next morning. By the afternoon, there was a knock at my door. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept either. I talked to Vanessa, he said, before I could say anything. I told her if she ever speaks to you, about you, or near you like that again, she's done. Not just with me, with every event, every circle, every connection her family has ever borrowed from mine. I meant it, and she knows I meant it. That's not really the problem, Julian, I said quietly, stepping back to let him in. Then tell me what the problem is. The problem is that some part of me still believes her, I admitted, my voice breaking slightly. Not because I think you don't love me, but because I've spent 30 years being told I'm not the kind of woman men like you marry. And it doesn't matter how many times you prove that wrong. There's a part of me that's still waiting for the day it turns out to be true. Julian was quiet, letting the words settle instead of rushing to fix them. I can't undo 30 years of that, he said finally. I wish I could. But I can tell you this. I'm not choosing you despite what people like Vanessa or my mother or your mother think. I'm choosing you because when I'm with you, I don't feel like I have to be the heart name. I just get to be Julian. He stepped closer. That's not a phase, Lena. That's the first time in my adult life I've felt like myself. I looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time since the party, the fear in my chest loosened its grip, just slightly. I don't want to keep almost losing this every time someone says the wrong thing, I said. Then don't, he said simply. Let them say what they want. Let's stop giving them a vote. 2 weeks later, Julian's mother hosted a formal family dinner, the kind with place cards and 3 different forks, the kind I'd once found intimidating enough to lose my appetite over. Vanessa, somehow, had been invited, likely by someone in the family still holding out hope for a different outcome. She arrived looking as polished and confident as always, sliding into conversation with Julian's relatives like she'd never left. I watched her work the room, charming, effortless, exactly the kind of woman this house had been built for. Halfway through dinner, she raised her glass, ostensibly for a toast to the engagement, but her words carried an edge sharp enough to cut through the pleasantries. To Julian, she said, smiling around the table, who's always had a soft spot for a good underdog story. Her eyes flicked to me. I just hope this one has a happy ending. The table went quiet. I felt every eye shift toward me, waiting. I could have shrunk. The old version of me would have. Instead, I set down my fork, met her eyes directly, and spoke calmly. Funny, I said. I always thought the saddest stories were the ones where someone spent years chasing a life that was never really about love to begin with. I'd rather be the underdog who found something real than the favorite who never did. Silence. Then, from the head of the table, Margaret, Julian's mother, let out a short, surprised laugh. Well said, she murmured, lifting her own glass slightly toward me. Vanessa's smile stayed fixed in place, but something behind it cracked. Julian reached under the table and found my hand, squeezing it once, firmly. Vanessa left shortly after dessert, and this time, no one urged her to stay. She tried once more, a week later. A message sent to Julian's phone that he showed me without hesitation, something about reconsidering before it's too late, and a veiled reference to old memories she assumed still held weight. Julian didn't respond to it. He simply forwarded it to his mother and to Richard, the business partner who had invited her in the first place, with a short note asking that she no longer be included in family or business events. After that, she disappeared from our lives entirely, the way people do when the audience they were performing for finally stops watching. The wedding took place the following spring, in a garden just outside Atlanta, string lights woven through the trees, the kind of evening my younger self would never have believed could belong to her. My mother cried through the entire ceremony, unguarded this time. Danielle stood beside me as my maid of honor, whispering that she'd never seen me look more like myself. Even Margaret, seated in the front row beside Julian's father, watched with an expression that, for the first time, looked something like pride. I caught sight of a few unexpected faces in the crowd. My cousin Tasha, who'd once warned me that men like Julian didn't wife girls like us, sitting quietly near the back, her expression unreadable. I didn't need her approval anymore, but some small part of me noted, quietly, that she'd come anyway. As I walked down the aisle, I thought about every version of myself that had once believed this wasn't possible. The girl standing at the sink while her sister got engaged, the woman rehearsing polite refusals to men who asked if she was fairer in person, the version of me that almost let a stranger's jealousy convince her she didn't belong in her own life. Julian was waiting at the end of the aisle, and when our eyes met, none of that fear existed anymore. Just him, steady as he'd always been, exactly the way he looked at me the very first night at that gala, like I was simply someone worth knowing. We said our vows beneath string lights and a sky just beginning to turn dark, and when the officiant finally said the words making it official, I didn't hear a single voice from my past whispering that girls like me didn't get this. There was only the sound of Julian's voice, quiet and certain, the same way it had been from the beginning. "I told you," he murmured against my ear as we turned to face our family and friends, married. "I plan on spending a long time proving that story wrong." I smiled, the kind that came from somewhere real. "You already did," I said. End of story. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to like and subscribe.